we first met Jamie about 5 years ago when we were doing some work for Screwfix. So Screwfix were changing some of the proposition from what was a trade customer through to more of a kind of DIYer, a more kind of kind of jobbing DIYer, kind of consumer base. And they were concerned about how their proposition was put forward, but also things like where to put things like taps. So what categorization do you have, all those kind of things. So some of these minutiae of the experience were really quite important. So we worked with Jamie on that. So Jamie was the user experience and usability manager at Screwfix, and now he's the customer experience manager at Kingfisher. So he's going to give us his perspectives on the importance of user testing. Or the benefits of early user testing, in fact. So thanks very much, Jamie.
Okay, hi everyone. So I'm Jamie, and I'm Web Strategy Manager at Kingfisher. And today I'm going to talk to you about the benefits of testing early. Okay, and just to set the record straight, I went for Kingfisher. It's not Kingfisher beer, as very tasty as it may be. It's not Kingfisher Airlines. And nothing to do with bird conservation, anything like that. Actually, it's Kingfisher PLC, and that's the B&Q, Screwfix, Castorama group. And as John mentioned, I've got a lot of history through Screwfix, and I've now gone on to work for Kingfisher for the group. Okay, and today we're going to talk about testing and why it's important to test early. And really, I want to discuss three key concepts. The first is why we should think like architects. The second is why it's important to prototype. And the third is why you should never stop testing ever. Okay, so first of all, thinking like an architect. Now, I really like this analogy when looking at web design. If you think of what an architect has to do, they have a very serious job. They have to build things like bridges, hospitals, and skyscrapers. And it's very important for them in the design stage that they get it right. They don't want to get things wrong because when it comes to building the actual thing itself, it can be catastrophic if they make any mistakes. So I always like to think of web design just like this. Make sure you do things correct before you start. So obviously testing up front here is really key. And the language of design for an architect is the blueprint. And again, it's a really nice analogy for web design. So for a blueprint, it really will go through many, many revisions and amendments until it's actually finished. And the architect has to consider the needs of lots of different people. First of all, the clients, the people that effectively pay his wage packet. Also, the foreman, the construction team, he has to make sure that actually what he's designing, it has to be feasible. He can't do something wild and wacky that can never, it might look great on paper, but it'll never be possible to actually build. And most importantly, it has to address the needs of the users, the people it's actually building it for. So if it's a hospital or, say, a bridge, you've got to make sure that cars can get across it and it's not going to fall over. It's got to work for the end user, so he has to focus that in mind right at the start. And the thing that I really like about the architect model is the fact that changes later on in the build stage are very, very costly. So if you imagine you're building your skyscraper, you get to the 20th floor and then realize, oh dear, on the second floor we've made a mistake here. We need to move a supporting beam or knock down a wall or something. That's really, really costly. It causes lots of disruption. It's going to impact on the deliverable time to actually get the project finished. And it's just the same for web design. Once you actually go into the build phase of web design, if you make changes then, it's going to cost you a lot of money. It's going to cause you lots of problems. So actually testing early and making sure that you've got things in line and that you're confident that it meets the needs of your users and it's been tested and proven, then you can be confident when going to the build stage that you're going to minimize these kinds of issues. And in terms of the language of design for web, it's the wireframe, akin to the blueprint. So really, when approaching web design, for me, through experience, I'd always start off with what I'd call low fidelity. So this is just sketches. Could be on the back of a napkin. Really, the idea is it's very rapid, and you're going to fail many times. That's a given, but you want to fail because you want to iron out the mistakes as early on as possible, because this is the phase where it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to do a design and then find out, actually, this didn't really quite work. Let's do another one. You can tear it up and start again. It costs nothing. And as you test, obviously bringing your users on board, doing user-centered testing, and also with your stakeholders and the business, making sure that your designs actually meet their needs. You can evolve those wireframes so they can become more sophisticated and more high fidelity. So you can approach medium fidelity where actually the structure is much more defined, and it becomes a more sophisticated model as you go on. And the idea is that you should be making less and less changes the further down the road you go, because those big changes have been ironed out early, they've been spotted, and then as you go, the size of the changes should be smaller and smaller. Okay, and that leads very nicely on to the second thing I want to talk about, which is prototyping. And for me, this is really the key phase in testing, and this is where the user testing is absolutely critical for me. That this is really the point before you actually start the build of any web development project. So this is the key moment, the moment where it will work or it won't work, but you want to make sure that you actually find out at this stage. So going back to the architect model, architects, after the blueprint stage, or as part of it, they will conventionally build like a scale model. I'm sure you're familiar with this kind of thing on the screen. And these are great in that it makes what they're proposing on the blueprint phase, it actually makes it real. They can show it to their clients and say, this is what I'm proposing. Does this sound okay? And also, it's quite common that they will find new issues or new challenges when they actually build the model, things that at the blueprint stage they just wouldn't have seen. So, for example, maybe it's a courtyard in a building, and they realize once they've built it to scale as a model that actually it's really dark, the walls are too high. Now, you probably wouldn't have actually come across that at the blueprint stage. It's not the kind of thing that would have been discovered. So you have a new level of view on potential issues. So it's very important, but it is limited. It's only a small scale model. You can't actually have people walking in and out of this scale model to actually see whether it really works or not. But with web design, it's different. We actually have the ability to build web prototypes which effectively can look, if they're sophisticated enough, can look and behave just like a real functional website. So they can be fully branded, front end looks just like a real web page, but also you can embed interactions such as simple just clicking on links, going from one page to another, to even more sophisticated things like search entry, form entry, that kind of thing. So you can pretty much test almost anything that you'll want to build into a website when you actually come to build it. And that's very, very powerful because it means that you can actually test with users in a lab, get your own customers, and give them goals which are relevant to your customer base. So for example, for me, it's e-commerce, so it may be a checkout journey. You want customers to add an item to their trolley and actually check out and see if they can do it. And it's a real example. They're actually using something which is would be what you wanted to build. And you can uncover some really critical issues at this stage and really test whether it will work or not. And again, it's so important because I always think in terms of testing, you win both ways, because if you test it and you find that there's no issues, it's great, brilliant. But if you test it and you find you've got issues, then actually that's good too, because at least you've spotted it now. And again, it's easy to change a prototype. It's no great shakes to change a model, but it's a big deal if you're halfway through a website build and then you realize that actually, no, sorry, that shouldn't work that way, that's wrong, and you have to change it. It's very costly. And the last thing I want to say about prototypes is they're not just good for testing. Actually, once you have tested it and you're confident with your model, it's really great for stakeholder buy-in. You can show it to your board of directors, your senior management, and say, this is what we're intending to build. Is this what you were expecting? Does this meet your requirements? And people are generally much more receptive to a prototype than just a sketch on a piece of paper, because it's not really real, whereas a prototype brings it to life. And also, it's fantastic for the actual development team. If you've got a team of developers, you can give the prototype to them and say, look, this is what we want to build. This is how it should work. When you click this, it should go here. When you drop down this menu, this is what it should show. And there's no ambiguity involved, whereas If you're writing out a list of requirements, that can be really open to ambiguity, and that's where mistakes can be made. Okay, and the last thing I want to talk about is that you should never, ever stop testing. So it's important to test early, but you should never stop. So once you've actually built your website or you've released new functionality into the wild, well, it's not over in terms of testing. And a key lesson that I've learned is that you could have tested till the cows come home and you've got a fantastic prototype that you're really confident with. But once you actually launch it, there's a new set of challenges which come to the fore. Because it's real, it's out in the wild. So things like technical gremlins or bugs or defects, these are things which you just have to accept are going to happen. You can try and minimize them, but they're a fact of life. So it's important to test for those, look out for them, and identify them and fix them. Also, compatibility. There's so many different browser versions out there. Also, we're in a world of device fragmentation, mobile, tablet, you name it. So testing for all of those different variables is important too. And also performance. So you may have built a fantastic looking homepage with great whizzy graphics, but when it actually goes live, it takes 10 seconds, 15 seconds to download that page, and obviously that's not good enough. So again, in a real life environment, you're going to find new issues. So it's important to recognize those, to test them, and to fix them. And testing in the real world does have its benefits. So first of all, it's a real environment. Second, you're actually testing effectively with a real scale customer base. So instead of testing with, say, 10, 15, 20 people in a lab, you may be testing with, well, it's your customer base. Maybe it's 10,000, 50,000, 100,000 people all on your website. So the kinds of insights you can get back from that are fantastic. And also, you have the power of your web tools, such as analytics, to actually help to diagnose and find problems. So they're an additional aid for you when doing your testing and can help you prioritize your issues. And the last thing to say is that might all sound a bit scary, going live and going out into the wild, but you don't have to just jump right in. So through experience, when we relaunched Screwfix.com, we actually decided to launch it in phases because it was a brand new site. Our stakeholders were worried about, okay, you're going from the old sites and then completely brand new. It's a bit scary. We're not sure what's going to happen. Are our customers going to like it? Even though we've tested it, how can we be sure? So what we did was we, first of all, launched it as what I'd call a closed beta. So we had the current site still running. We had the new site running on a private platform. And we invited a small set of our customers, about 2,000. We invited them and said, come and have a look. And it was just restricted to those customers. Once we'd got those, their feedback, we made some changes. And then once we were confident enough, we then started to go towards an open beta. So to begin with, that was simply just a small button on the homepage advertising the fact that we had another website, a new site that we were very proud of, and come and have a look. But we weren't really pushing it that hard, so we knew we would just get a small segment of our customer base having a look. So again, not too scary. When we were a bit more confident, we started to push the throttle a bit more. So, for example, a really great way of doing this was through paid search, because you have such pinpoint control. So we started to change our landing pages for all of our paid search AdWords from the old site to the new site. So at the touch of a button, suddenly we had a massive amount more customers and traffic coming to the beta site. And then eventually, once we were confident enough that it was working, we'd ironed out any more bugs and issues, which, believe me, there were a few. Once we'd got there, we were comfortable and we went live. But it just takes the scariness and the pain of completely just making that big jump by doing a phase launch. Okay, so that's it from me, just to round up. So think like an architect, always prototype, and never stop testing. Any questions?
So I've got a question first. So one of our things about Juice is we're thinking that user experience activities, prototyping, all the user-centered design things that I was talking about earlier, can be important across different channels as well. So obviously your primary involvement is within the web channel. How does that kind of integrate, and how does that sit within Kingfisher with any other kind of domains within the business, and what kind of activities are they doing, and how do you communicate between yourselves?
Sure. Well, I suppose one thing that's really important now is that we're really in a multi-channel world, or cross-channel. So business like Screwfix or any of the Kingfisher businesses, they're all multi-channel. And so it's important not just to be siloed in the way that we test and communicate. I found through experience that just doesn't work, especially, for example, if you imagine a really good cross-channel journey, which would be placing a collection order. Now, you don't want to just test up until the point of through the web, up until checkout or placing your order for collection. It's important to know that actually the process is going to work once the customers place the order and they actually walk into the store, and that the goods will be there for them to collect. So for me, it's always been important to actually work holistically with all different departments and to effectively map out the customer journey end to end. So if that goes through multiple different channels, then you need to test through all channels. It's fundamental. And
have there been any resistances to doing that kind of thing, or people quite open?
No, we've actually had a lot of buy-in in terms of, I think the important thing is to get buy-in up front and to make sure that things aren't just landed on people last moment and say, we've just built this, you need to be involved. I think it's important to take people on the journey with you from the very start, and I found that's much easier then.
Great, so thank you. Have we got any questions from the audience? Yes.
When you mentioned mapping out the customer journey from end to end, where does that sit? Who owns that in the organisation, or where does it sit? Where does it come from, and is it universally used and accepted?
Sure. So the way that I've always worked is that we have a team, and there's always one person who's responsible in terms of the end requirements. It could be known as a truth or a business stakeholder. And I think it's always important to have a single point of authority, but that person needs to make sure that the needs of the business, the customer, the end users are met, and that the customer journey is understood. So in terms of actually talking to customers, doing the research, and organising it so that feedback all comes back to the person who's ultimately going to be making the decision in terms of what the model, the website's going to be.
Great. Any other questions? Yeah.
Just a quick one from me. Obviously, I'm quite familiar with the work, but what do you think the value has been of the process that you've followed? The prototype, lots of testing I know you've done, ultimately, what impact has that had for the business?
Well, I think it's a huge impact. Really going back to my presentation, it's so important to test and to do it up front. My philosophy is that if you have customer experience issues with whatever you're designing, you're going to encounter them at some point. It's just a case of when you encounter them. So you want to try and manage it, be in control, so that you discover them early and you can make changes when it's in a phase when it's not going to be expensive or disruptive. If you ignore the testing process, start actually building something, and then either during the build or once you've gone live, which is obviously the worst possible scenario, then realize that you've made design mistakes and that things just aren't working, that's much more costly and painful to the business. So for me, it's so important that all of that work is done up front at a stage when it's not going to be costly to the business.
Yep, I'll just run across here.
Hi. Testing and changing the technological bits is possibly the easiest, but say in the Screwfix example, you have lots of staff on the front end delivering to tradespeople, which is what Screwfix was all about. When you then changed the model and wanted DIY, completely different customers coming in, what process did you go through to get your end user staff, if you like, able to cope with the different type of customer that's coming in?
Right. Well, the example that was given was Screwfix were actually building a website for a different customer base. It wasn't actually Screwfix. The Screwfix customer wasn't changing to cater for trade counters, but we have gone through scenarios where we have actually changed our customer mix. And actually, Screwfix as a business, in terms of stores, have changed the format of their stores to cater for different types of customers. So they've gone more specialized for certain types of trade, which are the ones which are most high value. So a really good example is if you go to most trade counters now, there are actually two different ways of shopping. One is you can go through as a normal Screwfix customer, and the other is you can be a specialist plumber or electrician. And research showed that actually the core electrician and plumber doesn't really want to be associated with everyone else. They're quite individual. And they don't want to have to wait in queues with more kind of DIY and kind of odd job Screwfix tradesmen. They want like a more premium experience. So actually what Screwfix did was they recognized that and they built a separate desk, it's all kept very separate from the main one, where they can just walk up, order their goods. They actually get a different price. So it's actually more trade priced than your average Screwfix customer. But they have to have credentials to prove that they qualify for those prices. But effectively what I'm saying is they get treated differently to your standard customer. So we recognized that actually they need a different level of service, and that was rolled out across the trade counters.
Any more questions? So I've just got one. So you recently launched a mobile site. What's been the impact of that? So extending across another channel, and what do you think the impact of that is with the kind of in-store experience and the kind of multi-channel holistic approach that your customers may have now?
Yeah, I think mobile is very exciting, and we have seen some real differences already with the launch of our mobile sites. I think a really nice example is the way that it's changing customer behavior, and the trade counter example is fantastic actually. But one thing that we've found is we launched a click and collect service on our mobile site. So it allows customers to check stock on their phone for their local trade counter, and they can place an order for collection and then go and get it. And we actually found unexpected customer behavior, the way that customers were using this service for their benefit. So customers hate queuing. They don't like to have to queue in a trade counter or any shop. And what we started to observe is that customers were using the mobile site to check stock while in the trade counter. So they're actually physically there on the mobile site and place an order within the trade counter, even though they could just walk up and get the goods because they know they're in stock. But they would do it as a way of skipping the queue because they don't have to worry about it. They've placed the order, it's been confirmed, and while everyone else is queuing up, waiting to be served, their box is being picked in the warehouse at the back, and then in 5 minutes, it's ready for them. So I think it's really interesting the way that mobile's changing customer behavior and the way it's actually bringing behavior that's even unexpected to us, that customers are finding ways to benefit from it.
That's great, thank you very much. Okay, any questions? Any other questions? Okay, so we're going to take now a 20-minute refreshment break. There's refreshments around the corner on the bar there. And when we come back, we'll hear from Sarah from Bowden and also Rory from Ogilvy. So thank you very much. Feel free to contact any of us and also, of course, network amongst yourselves. We're really interested in your perspectives around providing a joined-up customer experience. So it's about reaching out, researching and affecting change in behaviour across both physical and also digital channels. So we're interested in anything you've got to say, and you can educate us about all of those things. Okay, thank you very much.